Chuck Schumer's voice carried across the chamber. Controlled, deliberate, the kind of tone meant to box someone in without raising the volume. He called Senator John Kennedy a political stunt. The words didn't echo, they settled. They suggested calculation, theater, insincerity. But Kennedy didn't shift in his chair. His hand moved, slow, toward a folder that had been on the table all morning. It wasn't today's talking points. It was a record, a vote record from the 1990s. And when he opened it, the entire tone of the hearing began to change. You're about to hear the moment it happened. Before we roll it, make sure you're subscribed. This is the one they didn't want replayed. The hearing room that morning felt scripted. Everyone in their seats, staffers passing folders down the row, cameras in the back finding their angles. Chuck Schumer was already in that steady rhythm, the kind that sounds less like debate and more like narration for the nightly news. He'd been through enough of these sessions to know how to frame a clip before it even hit the networks. He opened with numbers, then with phrases, political theater, grandstanding, and finally the one word he knew would stick, stunt. It wasn't shouted, wasn't sneered. It was placed like a careful chess move in the middle of a sentence. It was meant to end the exchange before it began. Across the table, Kennedy didn't look up right away. He was already turning the thin tabbed folder in front of him. It wasn't the day's briefing packet. The edges were worn, the pages slightly yellowed. The cameras didn't notice. Schumer didn't notice. But a couple of staffers behind Kennedy did, and one of them shifted in his chair. The folder was marked in small block letters. Senate Vote Records, 1990s. Kennedy's finger stopped on one tab in particular. When he looked up, the energy in the room didn't spike. It dipped. And that's when Schumer realized this wasn't going to be one of the days where he controlled the edit. Kennedy didn't rush. He let the page breathe before he spoke. The paper's faint crackle carrying farther than it should have in a room full of microphones. The heading was plain. Senate roll call vote number 242, October 1995. And under it, one name after another, including Schumer's, locked in the column, Kennedy's thumb tapped twice. This was the first time, Kennedy said, voice even. The first time you voted for the measure you are calling a stunt today. The air didn't shift because of volume. Kennedy didn't raise his voice. It shifted because suddenly the conversation wasn't about the bill on the table. It was about whether the man throwing the word stunt had been in the same spotlight before. Schumer's eyes flicked toward the page, just for a second, but the cameras caught it. He started to form an explanation, but Kennedy turned the paper toward him and read out the measure's description. Word for word. It wasn't inflammatory. It wasn't twisted. It was Schumer's own recorded vote, framed by the Senate's own language. From the back row, a couple of reporters started writing faster. They knew if Kennedy had started with one vote, there were more, and the folder still had 5 tabs untouched. Kennedy leaned forward, resting one hand on the folder and the other on the desk. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Senator, he said, slow enough for the stenographer to match each word, if doing this in 2025 is a stunt, then was it also a stunt when you did it in 95? The room didn't gasp. It tightened. Chairs shifted. A couple of aides glanced toward Schumer, like they weren't sure whether to signal him to answer or move to the next talking point. Schumer's mouth opened just slightly, as though ready with a rebuttal, but nothing came out at first. He glanced toward the committee chair, maybe hoping for an interruption. None came. And Kennedy, seeing the hesitation, didn't fill the silence. He let it live there, long enough for it to be uncomfortable, long enough for the cameras to catch Schumer adjusting his glasses twice. When Schumer finally spoke, it wasn't to answer. It was to pivot. A classic move. But the fact that he had to pivot instead of hit back, that was the moment reporters in the front row underlined their notes. Kennedy had just planted the seed, and the seed was a question that everyone in the room could repeat in the exact same words. Kennedy flipped to the next tab in the binder, the paper making just enough sound to turn heads. It wasn't a random sheet. It was marked with a bright yellow post-it, the kind you only put on something you've been waiting to use. Senator Schumer, Kennedy said, tone measured, this is roll call vote 267, October 1998. Your name is right here. You voted aye." He didn't have to explain what the bill was, but he did anyway for the cameras. This was a measure to extend the very policy you've been calling a political stunt all morning. You didn't just support it once, you championed it. You stood in front of microphones and said it was the right thing for America. Schumer didn't look at the paper, he looked at Kennedy. That in itself told the room everything. Reporters in the press section started typing faster. Even a couple of Democratic aides in the back exchanged glances, the kind that mean we knew this might come up, but not this soon, and not like this. Kennedy tapped the page with the back of his pen. If this is a stunt now, was it a stunt then? Or is the only difference the party that brought it forward? The air in the hearing room didn't move for a full 2 seconds. Schumer's jaw shifted. His fingers tightened on the microphone base, and still no answer. It was exactly the kind of silence Kennedy knew would be replayed tonight, in clips that cut straight from his question to Schumer's pause. Schumer finally leaned toward the mic, clearing his throat. "Senator Kennedy, I think you're mischaracterizing the context of that vote. The circumstances were different. The bill was different. But Kennedy didn't give him the luxury of momentum. He raised a hand slightly, palm out, not in a shout, but in a controlled interruption that made the cameras whip back to him. "With respect, Senator," Kennedy said evenly, "the language of that bill and the one before us now is almost identical. I've read them both. The only substantive change is the year on the cover page, and the party proposing it." That's when Schumer tried the pivot, the oldest move in the playbook. He veered toward immigration statistics, then to budgetary priorities, then to a vague remark about bipartisan trust, but each new sentence stumbled over the last. The reporters could hear it, the aides could hear it, and the public, watching at home, would hear it loudest. Kennedy didn't have to say a word for the pivot to collapse. He simply sat back, pen resting between his fingers, the kind of stillness that says, "Go ahead, keep digging." Schumer's voice thinned, his arguments circling but never landing. The longer he talked, the more it sounded like someone trying to explain away something they'd already been caught doing. By the time he stopped, the damage was done. The pivot hadn't saved him. It had just drawn more attention to the very page Kennedy had already placed on the record. Kennedy didn't rush. He reached for the folder again, flipping past the pages he'd already used like they were speedent rounds. The chamber was quieter now, the kind of quiet that follows a hit no one expected to land. He stopped on a sheet marked in the margin with his own looping pen, read it once, and then lifted his eyes. "Senator Schumer," Kennedy began, "on June 12, 1996, you said, and I quote, 'Principle is not something you trade for votes. It's what you keep when the votes are gone.'" Schumer's chin pulled in just slightly, the recognition instant. Kennedy let the silence hang a beat before continuing. "You stood right there," Kennedy said, pointing toward the floor in front of the clerk's desk, "and you argued that a bill with this very framework was an insult to the Constitution. You called it reckless. You called it dangerous." The air shifted. The aides froze their pens. Even the stenographer glanced up. "And now," Kennedy added, voice calm but sharp enough to cut, "you've spent the better part of this year defending that same bill, word for word. So my question, Senator, is simple. Which of your statements should the American people believe?" Schumer's mouth opened, then shut. A pause stretched too long for television. Kennedy didn't fill it. The quote had landed exactly where he wanted it, not as an attack but as a mirror Schumer couldn't turn away from. Kennedy didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He closed the folder, slid it toward the edge of his desk, and looked directly at Schumer. "You were right in 1996, he said, each word measured, "and the only thing that's changed is you." It landed like a gavel strike. No flourish, no follow-up, just the weight of a truth pulled from the Senate's own record. Across the chamber, even Schumer's closest allies glanced away. Cameras caught him leaning back, a rare tell, before the clerk's voice broke the silence to move to the next order of business. The clip would loop endlessly by nightfall. Kennedy, seated and steady, ending an entire exchange with one sentence that needed no explanation. If you think more people need to see this kind of exchange, hit that like button and subscribe for the next story before it breaks.